This land is your land, this land is mine. From 1861 to 1865, the United States experienced a terrible civil war between the northern states, the Union, and the southern states, the Confederacy. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed, and the country was on the verge of permanent division. The Civil War ended with the victory of the North and the abolition of slavery. In the wake of this bloody Civil War, the country, both the North and the South, sought political and cultural reconciliation. Veterans of both sides, soldiers who had seen death and survived, played a unique role in this national reconciliation. The veterans of both sides mutually held commemorative events shortly after the war. The photo shows the veterans of the Union and Confederate armies shaking hands at the wall in front of the 69th Pennsylvania Infantry Monument in 1887. In 1913, the federal government held a 50th anniversary reunion at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The 1913 Great Reunion was the largest ever Civil War veterans reunion. All honorably discharged veterans in the North's Grand Army of the Republic and the United Confederate veterans were invited. The official celebration was held from July 1st to July 4th. 53,407 veterans, including 8,750 Confederate, and more than 50,000 visitors gathered in Gettysburg. They commemorated the 50th anniversary of one of the most pivotal battles in the Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg was the bloodiest conflict of the Civil War. Now, the former battlefield became a sea of tents. The great camp consisted of 280 acres and more than 5,000 tents. Vast amounts of supplies were gathered and numerous personnel assembled, including an army of more than 2,000 cooks and bakers, and hundreds of volunteers from the Boy Scouts, the Red Cross, and additional organizations. On July 4th, President Woodrow Wilson addressed the crowd. We have found one another again as brothers and comrades in arms, enemies no longer, generous friends rather, our battles long past, the quarrel forgotten, except that we shall not forget the splendid valor, the manly devotion of the men then arrayed against one another, now grasping hands and smiling into each other's eyes. Reconciliation was the dominant theme of the 50th anniversary. Confederate and Union veterans with their flags at the Great Reunion of Gettysburg. Soldiers from both sides of the war warmly embraced and shook hands against the backdrop of the battlefield where they had once fought. Union and Confederate soldiers gathered around the cannon. The cannon had fired at the other side, but now it became a symbol of reconciliation. One veteran in Confederate gray, the other in Union blue, sat arm in arm. Perhaps only soldiers who had seen death on battlefields could understand what war truly was. An iconic photo. A Union and a Confederate veteran joining hands across the stone wall. The stone wall had been a bunker. The North's Grand Army of the Republic and United Confederate veterans marched with their flags at Gettysburg. Confederate and Union veterans passed the time with a fife and drum corps. An old veteran read quietly. Veterans of both sides made conciliatory overtures and enjoyed the hospitality of former enemies. There was a report that two men purchased a hatchet at a local hardware store, walked it to the site where their regiments had fought, and buried it. The survivors of the Civil War met again, not with arms in their hands, but as citizens of a united country. It was common for a veteran to seek out a man who might have shot him. Now they exchanged badges with a soldier from the other side. The old soldiers in blue and gray posed side by side for the camera near the great tent. Former comrades in arms met again. Union veterans were at Gettysburg reunion full of joy. Union veterans posed. They thanked the great being who allowed them to enjoy the great reunion, and more missed their dead comrades. Union veterans stood in front of tents. They told and recalled the hard war years together. Former comrades in arms met again. Confederate veterans were at the Gettysburg reunion. Former comrades in arms of Confederates stood at the old battlefield and relived the terrible days where so many of their comrades had lost their lives. Former Confederate soldiers gathered at a North Carolina Tar Heel tent. Special trains arrived in Gettysburg to discharge veterans at the great camp, each loaded with veterans from all across America. Grabbing their single handbag, the veterans unloaded, lined up, and enthusiastically marched to their respective quarters in the great camp. The camp was a model in every respect, well equipped and cared for. The great camp included the great tent, 200 by 450 feet, with its 13,000 chairs. Former comrades or enemies had meals at the same table. 3 hot meals per day were served to the veterans from the mess tents. Each man was issued a cup, plate, and utensils that he could take with him after the reunion. The favorite beverage? Coffee with lots of sugar. Vice President Thomas Riley Marshall and his wife were at the reunion. The youngest veteran at the reunion was 61 years old, and the oldest alleged that he was 112 years old. It was estimated that over 200 sets of veteran brothers attended the reunion. Former Congressman and Union General Daniel E. Sickles, the last surviving Corps commander of either army, attended the reunion accompanied by his private nurses. General Sickles stands on the spot where he had lost his leg. A veteran shows a bullet-riddled jacket. Outside of the official ceremonies, there was a time for old friends or old enemies to relax and talk over old times. Boy Scout escorts took a break for some fun. Several hundreds of escorts helped the aged veterans move smoothly around the encampment. But it was a reenactment of Pickett's charge at the Battle of Gettysburg and the fighting of 50 years earlier that people remembered most. Representative J. Hampton Moore of Pennsylvania spoke at the Pickett's Charge commemoration. The aged Confederates and Federals marched up to each other, even though many tottered or held canes. But instead of shooting each other, when they met, they shook hands, wept, and then joined in laughter and smiles and backslapping. A veteran wrote, "I am half 1,000 miles away from home, but all the same, I am home. This is my home, this country of ours, America. There is no better guarantee of the perpetuity of this nation than this assembly here today. It is the birth of the new America." The site where the great tent stood once again returned to peaceful cropland for raising corn and wheat. However, the road to reconciliation is still very long. The Great Reunion was America's strongest demonstration of national unity. At the time, the New York Times wrote, "The pilgrimage to Gettysburg proclaims to the world the solidarity of the American people. It is a significant warning to any of the great powers who mistake our political upheavals and internal strife for a lack of homogeneity among the states." Shall we review these words today? This land is yours.